We are going to start with Dr. Ramsey Osfor, and before we do that, I just want to reflect that this is continues to be a pretty amazingly challenging and very, very fluid situation. And I'm sure, as Ramsey will touch on, we find ourselves really, kind of behind the eight ball here in the U.S. and all over the world, but particularly here in the U.S. Cases are continuing to climb, morbidity and mortality, and just a lot of confusion and a lot of desperation. And being on the healthcare side, it's really important for us to do our best to provide everything we can to you, our patients, and our community. And I just want to also just take a moment and really reflect on the amazing service that so many healthcare providers are giving right now. And I just feel such a debt of gratitude on the one hand, and also honored to be part of that service. But we have a very virtual setup right now, and so we're doing our best to support folks, but we're out of the fray, the immediate front lines. And for those people who are out there and are taking care of the patients on the front lines and risking their life and their health, and again, I just feel such a debt of gratitude. So I want to call that out. So thanks again for being here. And Ramsey, if you are ready, you can go ahead.
I am. Hi, everybody. Great to be able to talk to you all again and chat a little bit about what's going on with COVID at the moment and some of my experience and impressions of what's happening in the Bay Area, California, the US, and abroad. And again, I'm not going to get into too many of the nitty-gritties. We'll save that for the question and answer time if there are specific questions. Do our best to answer those afterwards. So let's see. Can everybody see my screen here moving through the slides? Yes. Okay. So we're on. Let's see. Because
I see a slideshow set up if you want to go to.
Yeah, it's not working. Hold on one second.
You might want to switch monitors or the setup.
Yeah, that was a problem last time. Sorry about that.
No problem. Take your time.
So just to talk a little bit about while I'm getting this set up here, we're seeing, I think we all know that the epidemic is getting a little bit more interesting, shall we say, and perhaps a little worse in some parts of the country, obviously. And in particular, though, in California, there's been some good news. And that good news is that California seems to be achieving a flattening of the curve, which is quite impressive, actually. So here we go. I'm sorry about that. Let's see. Let me try sharing again. And so.
Do you want me?
Hold on a second. Sorry, everybody. So
no problem.
There's the PowerPoint. I don't know why it didn't work. Slideshow. Play from start. It's not working that way. Okay, so I'm just going to do it this way.
Yeah, it works fine. Yeah, it works fine this way.
So what some of the news updates this month or this week are wearing a mask. So I'm actually, a lot of this has been debated a lot in the news. Do we wear a mask or do we not? I'm actually advocating that everybody in the country wear a mask at all times outside of the house when you're in high risk of coming within more than 6 feet of somebody. There's a lot of reasons for that. A lot of societies accept that more than we do. And for some reason, and Americans and Western Europeans really aren't used to wearing a mask. But in Asia, they were really used to wearing masks during the SARS epidemic, and they've had bird flu and other reasons to become more habituated to doing so. And I think wearing a simple cloth mask, we don't want to take away the masks from healthcare workers, which are still in short supply in all settings, which I've been working with closely. So but we're recommending, there's many companies making them. I bought a bunch for the family from a company called Los Angeles Apparel. They're turning these out in multiple colors. There's new colors added every day. I'm going to the grocery store. I went to Target yesterday to get a game to play with the kids because they were getting bored. I wore a mask while I was in the store. So I think that's what we should be doing. It will also help people who are sick to get used to wearing a mask. You won't be calling yourself out if you have a little cough or not feeling well. Everybody will be wearing a mask. I think that's what we really should move towards. Los Angeles County came out with strong recommendations to do so. Newsom didn't go that far, but said that it's a good idea. I'm suggesting that it's a great idea. I think that doing so during this time will help a lot. I think we're in for a prolonged pandemic, and I think there's going to be fits and starts of once we loosen physical distancing restrictions, we'll have some fits and starts of outbreaks here and there. We'll have to put those out. Some people are suggesting maybe, I think the school year is over. I don't think that, I'm not over in terms of education, but over in terms of going back to school. I don't think the kids are going to go back to school in California and in many parts of the country this school year. And in the fall, we'll have to see what happens. It might be we'll go to school for a week, home for a week, go to school for a week, home for a week. We'll see. We haven't figured that out yet. Hopefully that wouldn't have to happen, but we'll see. And antibody testing, more and more people are getting interested in that. I think it's fantastic. I think that we really need to look at antibody testing, and I'll explain why in a second. And then, as I said, California seems to be flattening its curve. So for in terms of coronavirus cases, again, this is from Hopkins site. This was last Friday morning, and this is this Friday morning. So you see, we've doubled worldwide cases in a week. The U.S. now leads the pack in terms of deaths, and Italy leads the. I thought U.S. leads the pack in terms of deaths. Anyway, in cases, it's U.S. And we're not far behind in deaths yet. Southern Hemisphere is still not super affected. I was looking at Australia earlier this morning. It's still not super widespread in parts of Australia. Certainly some countries are not reporting as much as others, but we don't think, you can see a little speckle of Australia. There's a little red dot in Perth, which is the major city on the western coast, that there isn't that much activity there. And we don't understand why they're moving from summer towards winter. There's a hope that it could be seasonal. I want to show you in terms of daily confirmed cases, so where the curve is flattening in selected countries. And in a lot of places, including Italy, as well as Germany, France, they're all flattening their curves. United States is not yet flattening our curve overall because we're late to the physical distancing game, and we're late to the testing game. California, I want to shout out to my colleagues and friends at various county health authorities in California and at the California State Department of Public Health. They've been doing a fantastic job. Santa Clara was the first county they actually got 5 other counties in the Bay Area to start the first county-wide isolation in California, and the rest of the state soon followed. So that's why California is a little bit ahead of the game. If we had the California curve, we might start to see it tapering out a little bit. So, not all of you listening are in California. You might be in some other places. So welcome to my fancy artistry here. I wanted to explain the difference between a PCR-based test and antibody test. And I want to tell you why that matters. So this is a human cell in blue. And you can see, I drew a couple of viral particles. The coronavirus looks a little bit like this. The little penciled in squiggly line is viral RNA. So that's the genetic material of the virus. It binds to a receptor on certain cells, and lung and upper airway cells actually tend to have a lot of these receptors called ACE2 receptors. So the viral particle binds the ACE2 receptor, and then it inserts into the into the cell. The DNA gets into the cell, and and then it gets replicated by viral processes. The virus has an enzyme that helps replicate it. More copies of this RNA are produced, and more viral particles are produced. And so when you're doing a test for the virus right now, we're testing for this RNA, basically. We're testing for the genetic material of the virus. And so that's a direct test. So that tells you if somebody is currently infected. So today, if that test is positive, they're infected. Now that test has anywhere between 70 and 90% sensitivity. So a positive test doesn't mean, a positive test means you're infected. Although I've seen some false positives too. So we have to be careful with that. A negative test doesn't necessarily mean you don't have the virus. If you have the symptoms, you have the virus. That's one reason why getting tested for most of us doesn't, at this stage in the game when we don't have that many tests available still, it may not matter. The other thing to look at on the right-hand side here is the viral, this is sort of a timeline of the infection. So the red is the RNA, the viral's detection, and there's ways to actually quantify this. So I did a little schematic. So let's say that, and this is the level, and over here is time. So if you look at the y-axis, so you might be exposed here at this line, time point 0, you get exposed. You don't have any symptoms, but do you see this here, this little window in between where I have it written no symptoms? You're not, you might have virus, you might be infectious, but you don't have symptoms. That's a good reason to be wearing masks. Okay, it comes down to you can infect people, and this virus, as opposed to others like influenza, probably has a longer period here. So we call this the incubation period. This is probably about 4 days from exposure to symptoms, 4 to 6 days on average. We're allowing up to 14 days. And then you get sick, so the amount of virus comes up, and then you get better. But look, even when you're recovering, you still are shedding some virus. So you could still be potentially infectious. Again, another reason to wear masks outside of your house especially. So then we have antibodies. And we've talked about this, and Dr. Schweik did a great job talking about this on a recent, a different podcast or YouTube that he did. But we're talking about 2 different kinds of antibody responses, IgM, which comes up earlier in infection, and IgG. And so it takes a while. It's really IgG that gives you immunity. It takes a while for that immunity to develop, but once you have immunity, you are protected. You're immune. So perhaps this is 2 weeks out. So 2 weeks later, after initial infection, you might be immune to this, and we can detect that with a test for antibodies. So antibodies will bind. They actually kind of look like this, but they will bind to these proteins on the viral particles and be able to inactivate the virus. And so this was shown in a bunch of studies. Somebody did a great study in rhesus macaques, which are monkeys that are relatively similar to humans in terms of immune system. And they indeed showed that you cannot, at least those monkeys did not get reinfected once they had immunity here. So, and they re-challenged them with the virus to do that. So that's a very important concept to make. And the more we know about antibodies, so a lot of countries are talking about immunity certificates. So the UK is thinking strongly about this, and I've got friends working on antibody testing. So soon we'll have widely available antibody testing, and if you have antibodies, you can, if you're a healthcare worker like me, I can go work in a hospital, and I don't have to worry about all of the personal protective equipment to the degree that I would did I not have antibodies. So you can use less PPE. You can also be out in the community and not at risk of infecting anybody. So again, we talked about social distancing last time. I want to keep that in mind. More and more people are talking about physical distancing. I was really happy to see that. One point about fever. Fever in this infection looks to be critical, looks to be a great thing. It's actually helping with the immune response. So not to get too technical, but there are different things that are released when you get an infection. One of them is something called TNF, or tumor necrosis factor. And that can be bad if it's chronically elevated, but acutely it can help you fight infections, which is fantastic. And that's what that's what seems to be happening here. So I think I said this last week, I'm going to say it again. Tylenol treats a nurse. It does not treat the patient. Everybody always likes to give Tylenol for a fever. If you have a fever and you're an adult and it's 101.5 or lower, even 102, if you're feeling okay otherwise, let it be. Don't treat the fever. Let the fever be. That is actually helping you in terms of fighting this infection in particular. And there's some data about that. We can show that next time. I'm going to show the same slide as I did last time. Most people should not be tested. If you're having symptoms and you've had an exposure, you likely have it. Even if you don't have a known exposure, you likely have the infection. So with that, I'm going to show you a little bit of serenity, and remember to keep track of the positive here. We're always trying to think of the positive sides of this, and how when we do come out of it, and we will, how we can keep some of that positivity going into our lives in the future. So with that, we'll open it up to questions.
Ramsey, I have a question.
Okay.
I'm wondering, there's a great video going around where you can make your own mask from a paper towel, accordion it up, and then staple a couple of rubber bands to it. It looked easy. Would it really be effective for the purposes you're talking about?
I would rather you use a bandana, or get one of those masks from Los Angeles Apparel. I have no interest in that company, or a Gap is making some, I think now. There's a lot of people making masks. I would rather you use a cloth mask. You can make a homemade mask. You can use a bandana. Paper towels are probably too porous.
Okay.
Let me actually, Ramsey, before we go to Q&A, let me do a short slide deck that I put together. I also have a slide that has some interesting data on that exact question. So we'll go to Q&A in just a sec, but I want to present this really quickly. So I'm going to do a quick screen share. Okay, let me know, do you see the PowerPoint slide deck? Yes, great. Okay,
yes.
Okay, and is it full screen now?
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay, so thank you, Ramsey, for that wonderful information. I also just spent some time. I actually have a watch list that I created on Twitter of a number of excellent scientists and virologists, and so I just spent some time combing through that and pulling out some interesting updates and data that I wanted to share. So let me just get this moving forward. There we go. So one thing that's very, very interesting and exciting and even gratifying, in my opinion, is that this epidemic is really coming at an unprecedented time in the state of science, and the ability that we have to collaborate and to share data, and also to move questions forward with amazing speed. And so this unique time and the ability to share that data and share the information across the social media sphere is really a pretty amazing time to see this happen. And we're all kind of watching this in real time as it unfolds. That does create confusion, and you know, there's a lot of preprint publications that are coming up and being published without being completely vetted in the normal fashion that they would with peer review, et cetera, in the interest of getting information out there as quickly as possible. So there is going to be a huge amount of cleanup on the back end, but for the most part, this is really kind of magical to watch, this level of collaboration. And Ramsey touched on this, but you know, the testing is still a little bit hit and miss. So if you do have symptoms and it seems like you did have the illness, it met the picture, you know, largely. Well, you do basically want to assume that you had the sickness and protect yourself and others from exposure. Ramsey touched on testing. There's this webpage, which is available, you know, which shows it's finddx.org for those who are interested, and just, you know, 186 different companies who have submitted a test. So a lot of these are not yet available, but they're coming down the pipeline. There's a couple of companies like Ray Biotech and Celexis, who I think pretty quickly will have a blood test that's out there. A lot of these are you know, IgG, IgM antibody tests, like Ramsey mentioned, and again, it can be useful for potentially determining who has had it, who potentially is, you know, now immune or unlikely to get it again in the short term. We don't know how long that immunity lasts yet. For previous coronaviruses, you know, frequently in the 1 to 3 year range, and some outlier coronaviruses actually, you know, having the infection itself provide immunity lasting up to 10 years. So we don't know for this strain where that's going to land. It's going to be a big experiment going forward. But as these tests come online, we will have a better sense, and hopefully these can be used to guide, you know, who can go back to work safely and who can re-enter society and try to get the societal machinery working again, because that's, of course, incredibly frightening, you know, downstream effect of this situation of what's going to happen to the global economy. You know, so we do know that, of course, it is exhaled in breath, and there's some really nice data coming out actually about the efficacy of face masks. You know, this is looking at coronavirus specifically, and, you know, droplet and aerosolized exposure is markedly decreased by wearing a mask. And this is the case for people who themselves are infected, and also potentially the case from picking it up from others around you. This was a pretty interesting study that just came out on Twitter. You know, I just found this morning, you know, basically showing that if you're going to make a mask at home and or try to improvise one, here is some relative efficacies that they tested out in this lab study. Again, at the top here in the black squares is an N95 mask, but you can actually almost approximate that by using a furnace filter, 4 layers, right? You know, things like a bandana down here below, scarf, or a 400 thread count pillowcase are somewhat efficacious. They're better than nothing, but not as good, for example, as a 600 thread count pillowcase, right? So the density of that fabric, and also note that these are all folded 4 layers. You know, so again, if you have even just a simple surgical mask, that's going to give you a decent level of protection. And if you don't, then these other solutions are potentially helpful and active. Another question that a lot of people have is, you know, especially in a healthcare setting, how can you disinfect the mask? And if you've been working and you've been exposed, and that mask definitely, you know, has coronavirus on it, what can you do? And this is just another quick preprint that came out where they studied, you know, the effects of these different methods of trying to decontaminate. And it turns out that actually putting the mask in a rice cooker for 3 minutes at about, you know, between 150 to 164 degrees Celsius was very effective, and also did not decrease the potential for that mask to filter. They tested a bunch of other methods: autoclave, ethanol, isopropanol, alcohol, bleach, etc., with you know, mixed efficacy, and also, you know, some increase or decrease in the ability of that mask to filter. I've also heard, other recommendation on the healthcare side, for example, if they are so lucky as to have as many as 4 masks, we think that the virus generally dies off of most surfaces in about 3 days. So they basically can label the mask 1, 2, 3, and 4, finish work, hang the mask up somewhere, don't touch it again until it just go through that rotation of the different masks. And that also should be a pretty safe method. There's a couple, and again, this level of sort of global collaboration, also the intersection there with technology. There's a lot of really interesting endeavors that have arisen that are looking at different ways to help this epidemic. This is a close friend of mine and colleague, Yaron Haddad, who ran a company called Neutrino, looking at artificial intelligence and machine learning around blood sugar and diabetes originally. He sold that to Medtronic, has been working and collaborating with them since, but as a side project just recently, he launched this website called coughona.com. And it's basically a database where they are collecting information from people who have had coronavirus and then using a smartphone, listening to their cough and collecting and saving all those coughs and signals, and basically mapping that to severity of illness, who has had the illness diagnosed, who is not sure but thinks they have had it, etc., to create this free, open, artificial intelligence machine learning tool, possibly to the point where in places that either don't have the testing available or are severely under-resourced, it's hard because we all are under-resourced right now, even in the United States of America. But also thinking about very rural areas or third world countries, et cetera, there might be the opportunity now to actually use an app to listen to the cough and to generate a risk stratification of likelihood of coronavirus infection. I found that quite interesting. This is another website called howwefeel.org. Basically self-reported of symptoms to see, what it looks like around you, what people are reporting around you, help doctors and scientists track the virus, et cetera. So for any of you who either have had coronavirus or who know people who have had coronavirus, I really strongly recommend that you use some of these tools and just get data out to these sources so that scientists can find novel ways of helping. As many of my patients know, I'm passionate about wearables and tracking physical data through devices. I wear this device called the Aura Ring. UCSF has a study now with Aura where if you're an Aura user, you can go into your Aura app and permission UCSF to be able to use your data so they can track changes in your physiology that then, and stratify people based on who does become sick, who doesn't, et cetera. So again, this kind of crowdsourcing, optimizing technology. This is a website, ccpp19.org, and they do have a database now for people who have had coronavirus, where they can register to donate plasma, because plasma donations are another way of treating, particularly in the more severe people. They're definitely finding that those antibodies that Dr. Asfour talked about, we can isolate them, we can generate plasma, and that has these antibodies in it to fight the coronavirus, and then we can give that to patients who are severely ill with benefit to them. So if you have had coronavirus or you know somebody who has, again, these types of projects are super important right now and potentially are a way of giving back and helping other people. Our homepage, California Center for Functional Medicine, we do now have live up here in the upper right, COVID-19 resources link, and we put all of these talks there. So we're, those are all live now if you want to go back and look at previous webinars and other resources that we've updated there. Those are all going to be continually updated and posted. And Dr. Asfour did mention last Friday, just before this webinar that we did last week, I sat down with a number of my colleagues in the Lyme disease world, Dr. Richard Horowitz, Dr. Steve Harris, Dr. Jacob Leone, and Dr. Eileen Ruhoy. And we recorded this, just under an hour webinar, just discussing, are people with tick-borne disease at increased risk for COVID-19? So I hope that some of you find that resource helpful. And again, it's on our website, and also there's a link up above there. Okay, so I'll pause there, and then let's jump into Q&A.
All right. I just wanted to say one more thing about masking is that a lot of the masking is helping people who are infected not to spread it. So by that standard, a mask that doesn't protect super well will be will be helpful. But obviously, and I like what you said about the pillowcases. So higher thread count sheets or pillowcases are the denser the fabric, the better. The more difficult it is to breathe. I don't think you need to wear one exercising if you're alone and exercising, but if you're on a hiking trail with 230 other people going each way next to you, then you might want to wear a mask. A windy day, you'd have less spread. That was one question. Other questions we're getting are, some masks have a valve? There are different kinds of N95 masks, and not all of them have valves on them. So I don't think that's an issue. An N95 is two-way protection. It will protect the person on the other side. Antibody tests, some people are asking, they're getting some antibody tests now. It's the Wild West. Some tests are good and some tests are not good. The best data I've seen so far is about 80% sensitive, which means if you actually have the antibody, 80% chance of telling you that, and about 90% specific. That means that if it's positive, is it really positive? Is it a real positive result? And it's about 90%. So it's pretty good. We haven't yet seen data. There are many people already selling these tests, but they are not widely available through some of the other bigger labs like LabCorp and Quest. Somebody's asking if you have a disposable mask, can you cover it with a bandana? Absolutely. That's a fantastic idea. We're doing that in hospital settings. We're using a surgical mask to cover an N95 in some cases. And somebody asked, can aspirin be used in low dose to manage a fever and keep it from getting too high? So in an adult, I'm uncomfortable over 102, 102.5, I start to get a little bit uncomfortable. So I would treat a fever there. I would use Tylenol. There's some reasons that non-steroidal anti-inflammatories might be harmful or helpful. There's mixed data, but I would favor not using aspirin. A nice study published in Clinical Infectious Diseases a few years ago in the Spanish flu said that people treated with homeopathy did better. There was a 30 times less death rate than people treated with aspirin. That's probably because they gave them way too much aspirin. And so a lot of aspirin can be harmful in that sense, but lower doses safer doses of non-steroidal anti-inflammatories are probably okay, but I would prefer, if we had to do something, I would use Tylenol. People are asking about airborne spread. So you can spread during conversations. There's a good study in Japan, actually, that came out showing that two people sitting next to each other having a conversation, or one person coughing in a room the size of a classroom, had persistent droplets. One thing that's really good there is ventilation. Open the windows. Don't stay in a closed room with strangers. So ventilation, air exchange is important. And to get the best air exchange, you need two windows open on different sides of the room, ideally. But even one window will significantly reduce the number of things. And for reusing an N95 mask that people might have, use it. You can use it a lot until it's either visibly soiled or not obviously working. Remember, you're not using it as a healthcare worker would. So as long as I would prefer that it's just the same person using it. Don't share it with your family members, but use it as long as it will fit and until the straps break. And if the straps break, then then you can sew new straps on even, and it'll still be relatively effective, especially compared to what else is out there. Some people are saying fecal oral transmission. There has been COVID detected in feces. It does infect the GI tract, brain, lungs, other parts of the body probably. So viruses, remember, tend to go everywhere. The viral load isn't as high in stool as it is in the lungs, for example, or a cough. So you'd likely expect less in that situation, but it's conceivable. Somebody's asking about.
And also, just one note on that, Ramsey. It certainly actually can present with a predominant gastrointestinal picture. So diarrhea, either with or even without some of the other classic coronavirus symptoms, can also be a presentation. So certainly being careful of GI symptoms alone, gastrointestinal type illness, and then sharing bathrooms. There was also a question about classic symptoms. Somebody wanted us to review that. So I did share this screenshot. Coronavirus compared to cold versus flu. Again, like Ramsey said, frequently coronavirus has a fever, sometimes with fatigue, commonly to have that usually dry cough, usually not a lot of sneezing or runny nose, which is a little bit of a differentiator. But also, we have seen some runny noses there as well. So it's not a fixed rule. Sometimes sore throat, sometimes diarrhea, like we talked about, and headaches, etc. And we look at that in graphical format. This is from a covidgraph.com website, source of data, visualizations, again showing fever, dry cough, fatigue, shortness of breath, myalgia, sore throat, headache, and then dropping off, right? So nasal congestion about 4.8% of the time.
So, and thanks for sharing that. That's key. And one thing to remember is that if your flu season is dying out, cold season is dying out, but we are seeing, we're still seeing some activity, but at this point, it's probably more likely, especially if you have a fever, but not necessarily, you have similar symptoms, any of those that Dr. Schweig listed, you probably have COVID. And do you need to get tested? You probably don't need to get tested unless you're significantly symptomatic or in one of the higher risk groups, older, immunocompromised, recent cancer, high blood pressure, cardiovascular disease, or uncontrolled diabetes. Some people are asking also where you can get an antibody test. So far, there's no routine place that you can get an antibody test. That'll probably change by next week.
There will be soon, though. Yeah, soon.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I do think once it's available, again, we've in our practice, evolving discussion on what to tell people about just getting routine blood work done, and we've really, asked people, to be safe if and when they do go to the lab. If it's not urgent, maybe hold back and wait. Same thing, with regards to the coronavirus antibody testing. However, I do think there is a utility there because, again, we can kind of start to stratify who has had it, who doesn't have it. If there are higher risk people in the family, for example, and then you test later on the blood test that you have had it, maybe that you're the designated person to go to the store and do the errands, etc. So just some thoughts there.
Right. Some people are asking about what if you have pain, for example, a headache, and you don't want to bring down the fever. That's a good question, and we do know that viruses go everywhere. So it will, in some cases, we know it's affecting the brain, and you are it's likely to get a headache. There isn't, other than massage and maybe local therapy, a warming pillow on your neck or ice packs around your head, just to make yourself more comfortable without bringing the whole body temperature down, would be an effective method. If you're miserable and uncomfortable, then sure, go ahead and take some Tylenol, or you can try some curcumin, for example, for a little bit of pain and inflammation. That might help. But again, yeah, you really don't want to bring down the fever. Somebody's asking about nebulizing with hydrogen peroxide. I would not do that. I think you'll cause more damage to the lungs than than necessary.
No, that's also potentially dangerous. Also, when I was looking this morning on the studies looking at how to disinfect masks, Duke University has a trial going on right now, actually using nebulized hydrogen peroxide to disinfect the masks. But then there's a downstream question as to when the healthcare providers are using those masks, there is a maximum exposure amount per day of hydrogen peroxide, and so they're trying to find that line of using it, but also not causing toxicity. So I would not recommend that.
Right. People are asking, would H1, H2 blockers lessen the cascade of cytokine storm? You know, we don't know that yet. There's a lot of trials. Colchicine is being studied, steroids, interleukin-6 inhibitors. Part of the reason for not controlling the fever is in the later stage of infection, fever actually dampens the immune response. Initially, it's helpful, especially with tumor necrosis factor, but you know, in stimulating the immune response. But in the later stage of infection, it's probably helpful in calming the immune response. So that's one thing. I think there's a lot, so many trials of so many different existing medications and newer medications that we're going to have to wait and see for a lot of these other therapies.
Yeah, good. So maybe one or two more questions. Somebody asked about nebulized glutathione. So I don't know that there's data on that for virus prevention. We could look into that, but it can be helpful for keeping lungs healthy and also for just upping the antioxidant reserves in the body. And however, one major caveat would be that in a small number of people, there is a paradoxical, first time they use this, nebulized glutathione, there's a paradoxical reactive airway disease, like a tightening of the lungs that can happen. And so that first dose should always be done in a doctor's office. So again, if you've never done this before, I don't recommend this as the time to try. But if you have done it before and you've tolerated it well, certainly could be an adjunctive treatment. And then in terms of risk, you were asking about autoimmunity and does that put them at increased risk? We're not, it's a spectrum, right? So it depends on how severe your autoimmune disease is. It depends on if you are on immune modulator, biological type medicines. And, for the most part, if you have a fairly well-controlled autoimmune disease, we don't think it puts you at a greatly increased risk. But if you are on a biological medicine or immunomodulatory, immunosuppressive medicine, there potentially is, unfortunately, some risk there. And that is a very difficult discussion in terms of, do you continue that medicine or do you potentially pause the medicine? Because there's also risks to think about in terms of pausing. Sometimes these medicines, if they're working and then you stop it, they don't always work as well when you restart it. So that's a very tough discussion that you really need to have with your central provider, your rheumatologist or your inflammatory bowel GI doctor, et cetera.
Right, and this is a great time with those illnesses. If you're somebody who hasn't been able to stick, for example, to an AIP diet and get those symptoms under control.
Yeah.
This is a great opportunity. Go, whole hog, as we say, to really, AIP super strict and try to get those symptoms under control so you can discuss with your provider, one of us, and or your rheumatologist and other providers if you can skip an infusion if it will be safe because your symptoms are under control by other means. So a functional medicine approach here would be super important.
Okay, so I'm just posting this symptom list again by request. Again, this will be in the recorded webinar. We will also put a link to it on our website because I think this is important information. Last question before, a couple quick ones actually before we transition over to Lindsay. LDN, yes, still safe to continue. If you are on Plaquenil, it would, I think, potentially help you. We're still developing information on that, but it does look like it has had some efficacy and there's more studies happening. And then vitamin A and vitamin D, we're trying to find that sweet spot. We don't want you too low, but we also don't want you too high. And because these are fat-soluble vitamins, if you're taking mega doses, they're going to stay in your system for a longer period of time. And there's some theoretical research there to potentially have concern about high doses of these nutrients, then maybe potentiating the inflammation and the cytokine storm. That's the secondary phase of the infection. So great questions, everybody. Thank you. And at this point, we are going to transition over to Lindsay, if you're ready.
Hi, everybody. One second. Let me share my screen with you. Can you all see this?
Yep, looks good.
Okay. Let's see if it'll enter presentation mode. There we go. Okay. So this week I came across some really interesting research that's emerging on the gut microbiome in COVID, and potentially a lot of it's coming out of China actually, and potentially there may be some role for probiotics. So I wanted to touch on a couple therapy or nutritional types of therapies that might support your gut microbiome and your immune system during this time. So some research recently out of China suggests that the gut microbiota may play a role both in the risk of contracting COVID and in the clinical course of the disease. And I think Dr. Esfer touched on this briefly when he talked about the ACE2 receptor being, a route of entry for the virus into your cells. And it turns out, there's a really high concentration of these receptors in the lungs, which is partly why they are so susceptible, but there's also a decent concentration of them in the gut. So it follows you might want to do everything we can to support our gut health during this time. As patients at CCFM, you've probably heard that your gut microbiome plays a really important role in your immune system. Estimates appear to are in the range of like 78 to 80% of your immune system may kind of originate in your gut. So, in my opinion, that's a pretty good argument for using nutrition to support your gut microbiota and your immune system right now. So the first group of foods that I suggest focusing on right now are fermented foods because they contain probiotic bacteria. There's a study I came across suggesting that certain metabolites made by probiotic species that are commonly found in fermented foods actually interact with certain immune cells created by our immune system. And these metabolites actually were found to help the immune cells hone in on different threats. So just not saying that, your yogurt's going to help you do this, but it would be interesting to see, how you can use probiotic foods to support your overall health at this time. Some probiotic species like Lactobacillus plantarum, if you look at your probiotic bottle, you'll probably see that listed as one of the species on the back if you're taking a broad spectrum probiotic. This particular probiotic has been found to aid antiviral defenses in preclinical studies. So a list of a couple fermented foods to try would be different types of fermented vegetables. So a couple common ones are sauerkraut and kimchi. If you have access to a Whole Foods or a health food store, a lot of these places have a broad selection of fermented vegetables you can try. You could also do yogurt. If you're able to tolerate full-fat dairy, you could do a dairy-based yogurt. If you're dairy-free, you could try a coconut or almond milk-based yogurt. And just as a tip, I've been suggesting to clients to try, take up a side project, maybe try fermenting some vegetables or making your own coconut yogurt or something at home right now. In addition to being potentially more affordable than fermented foods at the grocery store, which may also be running low in some places right now. I think it's good to have some fun projects to do right now when we're spending so much time at home. So this is something that's on my to-do list. Actually, I want to start making some fermented vegetables in my spare time. You will need to find like a starter culture to start your fermented veggies or yogurt. And I actually suggest looking on Etsy. There's some cool little stores on there. You could support a small business and get a starter culture for your kimchi or beet kvass or yogurt. So in addition to eating foods that directly contain probiotic bacteria, it's really important for us to also eat prebiotic foods. And prebiotics are different types of fibers and other non-fiber compounds that support the growth of beneficial bacteria in our digestive tracts. There's some interesting research showing that prebiotics may indirectly support the immune system by boosting those beneficial gut bacteria. But they may also work through some other pathways, such as by inhibiting the binding of harmful microbes to cells in the gut. So some prebiotic foods to consider, focusing on in your diet. I just have a small handful here. Garlic, onions, and leeks are great ones to include. You could also do asparagus and dandelion greens. If you're able to digest oats or legumes like lentils pretty well, and they don't cause digestive distress for you, you could try those because they are a good source of prebiotic fibers. And then I just realized I forgot to include two on here that I am a fan of. Blueberries and other brightly pigmented berries we found are actually a pretty decent source of prebiotics. Green tea is another one that's been found to stimulate the growth of beneficial gut bacteria. And then raw honey is another source of prebiotic compounds. It's not a source of fiber, but there's other things in there that seem to stimulate beneficial gut bacteria. Maybe before we post this on the resources page, I can add those in there for you guys. And some other nutrients just to keep in mind, in the context of your diet that we need to support the gut microbiota. One is vitamin A. So I recommend, getting it through foods right now. You can find it in cod liver oil, pastured egg yolks, and in full fat, primarily pastured dairy products. There's research showing that vitamin A actually helps to create a strong intestinal barrier, which I kind of think of as like the soil for your beneficial gut bacteria to grow in. So it's just kind of one part of that ecosystem that we need to keep our good bacteria happy. And then vitamin D is also really important for the intestinal barrier and supporting gut bacteria. So I'm suggesting that people try to get outside if possible. I know the stay indoors restrictions vary based on where you're located, but spring is still coming and it's getting nicer outside. So I recommend trying to get a little bit of sunshine if you can for some natural vitamin D. But cod liver oil and fatty cold water.
Well, I never know with you guys. Oh, really?
Sorry, somebody is unmuted. Let me just see if we can mute you real quick. If you're not muted, please do try to unmute because your audio is coming through. I'm sorry please do mute if you are unmuted. I think we're okay. Go ahead, Lindsay.
Okay. So yeah, two other food-oriented sources of vitamin D are cod liver oil and wild salmon. And then another plant-based compound called quercetin, which has previously been found and researched mostly in the context of allergies, it's actually been found to support the integrity of the intestinal barrier. And it couldn't hurt to add some quercetin-rich foods to your diet right now. So some of the primary foods you'll find it in are onions, apples, and leafy greens. Here's my references. So I know that was short and sweet. Oh, I did see a question somebody submitted asking about fasting. I just had a couple quick thoughts on that, Dr. Schweig. I don't know if that's okay.
Yeah. Oh yeah, go ahead, please.
I actually just wrote a little piece on this the other day. I think if you have an intermittent fasting practice, where you're maybe fasting for 13 to 16 hours overnight pretty consistently, and you're doing it especially in the context of managing your blood sugar, I think it would be fine to continue with that. But some medical resources that I follow, one is Dr. Peter Attia's very proficient in the topic of fasting. He's recommending against doing longer fasts right now, just because they could potentially trigger a spike in cortisol, which may impact your immune function. So I think if you intermittent fast pretty regularly, have found that it helps with blood sugar control, which is important for in the context of COVID. I think that should be just fine. All right, that's all I have for you guys today.
Great. There's a couple of questions, Lindsay. One person asked if you have recommendations for starters on Etsy.
Yeah, there's one store that I've bought starters from a couple times, but I can't remember the name off the top of my head. So what I can do is find it even before the call ends today, and then I could put it in the chat box, or I could just give it to Christy and she could post it somewhere.
Yeah, I think we answered the vitamin A, vitamin D question a little bit earlier, but again, avoiding high doses on supplements, but it's okay to do, food intake, moderate food intake of both vitamin A and vitamin D. If you do know you're low in vitamin D, again, we definitely don't want that. So, checking your vitamin D levels, if you know those from previous, and also in our practice, many of you have probably had a test called PTH ordered by us because we tend to run that a lot. And we like the PTH to be less than or equal to 30 as an indicator that you have adequate vitamin D stores. So it's just a little cross check, a little side angle. So your vitamin D level might be on the lower side, but if your PTH is 30 or less, that tells us that your body thinks it has pretty good vitamin D stores. Okay, good. So let's transition. Valerie, if you want to take the lead, we're going to kind of go through some nice kind of exercises and time for us to connect and even in little small breakout rooms again as we did last week. So Valerie, I'll let you take it away.
Okay, thanks a lot. I'm going to continue with some mindful-based techniques to reduce your stress and anxiety. And I really believe in using techniques that are instant and easy and simple that can effortlessly weave into your everyday life. And at the end of last week, I mentioned that I would bring up the emotional freedom technique. So that's what I'm going to focus on today, and we'll see how long that takes. It's
so Valerie,
yes.
One favor, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but
No, please.
One favor I'd like to actually ask of everybody as we get started here. Many of you know I just love data. I love tracking data. I love looking at data. And I think data speaks to us. And so what we've done in our fire department wellness programs actually is to have us all collect a little bit of data. And so we're going to set up a little a poll later, but for now, just do it manually and have a little piece of paper with you. And I want you to answer these two questions. The first one, and we'll do this before and after of these stress reduction exercises so we can all see the effect of us individually and also as a group. First one is, how stressed are you right now? So on a scale of 1 to 10, kind of sit with yourself for a minute and just feel with 1 being no stress and 10 being extremely stressed. Give yourself a number. Is it a 2? Is it a 5? Is it a 7, a 9? How stressed are you right now on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being very stressed? And just write that down. And also, as you're writing these down, just above it, write before, so that we can remember which was before and which was after. And the second data point I want is for us all to measure our heart rate. So 2 places to measure the heart rate pretty easily. One is on your wrist, on the thumb side, on the outer part of the wrist. Right in here, there's a little groove that happens between some tendons. If you use 3 fingers even and put them there on your wrist and just experiment with different depths of how much pressure you're using until you can feel your pulse. That's option A. I think that's the easiest one. The other one is in your neck. Many of you who are runners or work out, you can kind of feel your neck vein and find your pulse there. Everyone take 10 seconds or so and just locate your pulse. Do your best. If you can't find it, you can practice and we can do it again next week. And so I'm just going to ask you to, when I say start, you start counting, and when I say stop, you stop, and you write down what that number is, right? We're just going to do it for 15 seconds, and then we're going to multiply that by 4 to get, actually let's do it for 30 seconds, and we'll multiply that by 2 to get your heart rate beats per minute, okay? So everyone, we're going to get ready here. Hopefully you have your pulse, and go ahead and start counting. And stop. So whatever number you got there, go ahead and write it down and multiply it by 2. And that is your current heart rate. Okay, so that's our before measurements. We'll do the same thing afterwards. And Valerie, sorry again for the interruption, but go ahead.
Oh, no, that's great. I'm so glad you interrupted with that. Well, the truth is, unless you are spiking stress right now, the exercise I'm about to teach isn't going to affect what goes on. It will a little bit, but EFT really works best when you're having extreme anxiety, extreme insomnia, a panic attack, a phobic attack, something like that. But it's really good to learn it now, pre-rehearse it, load it into your thinking brain so that when you are in a state of panic, it's there for you. You don't have to struggle with remembering what it is or how we do it. So, but the numbers may be affected. I'm going to be really curious to see how this goes. So, Callahan technique, emotional field therapy, thought field therapy. It was developed in the early 80s by Dr. Roger Callahan, who is a Beverly Hills psychiatrist, did some really fascinating pioneering work with that, and became popular over the decades, just kind of rolled out from there by several others. So it's taps on a combination of acupuncture and nerve ending points that you do to yourself in sequence. And this is the key. It's while focusing on the physical symptoms of stress in your body at that time. So if you don't have very high symptoms, if your stress level's a 3, it's going to go down by a couple of points, but you get a lot of impact if your stress is an 8 or a 9 or a 10, and it goes down to a 2. This technique is about 85% effective I'd say 85 to 95% effective for 85% of the people that try it. If you're part of that 15% that it doesn't work for, I've found that with additional coaching, you can cut that number in half. And the remaining people, the good news is it's not going to work for you. On you go to the next event. You don't have to invest a lot of time or money trying to get it right. It either works or it doesn't work. And it's pretty apparent. I first learned it back in the early 80s when I was just starting out my private practice as an integrative mental health specialist. And I spent the weekend listening to Dr. Callahan talk. And the last half hour on Sunday afternoon, he decided to actually show us the technique. I was pretty impatient at that point because he taught it to us in about 15 minutes. And that's really all it takes to learn. So I went to work on Monday morning. And one of my first patients then was extremely anxious. She didn't have many friends, a lovely human being because she was too shy. She could only work with kindergarten kids because adults just freaked her out. And she was having student parent-teacher meetings coming up, and she's, breaking out in cold sweats, not able to eat, not able to sleep for a week beforehand. True story. So she was really happy when I said, I learned this technique. It's kind of weird. Will you just indulge me, humor me? Let's see if it works or not. So I taught it to her. She came back the next week, grinning from ear to ear. She said, Val, I sailed through it. My anxiety never went above a 2 all week long. And after that, she started talking more to parents and lecturing and getting involved in the school. And pretty soon she was running meetings, and pretty soon she brought her guitar to the meetings because it was a private school, and singing. And she enjoyed that so much, she started singing in coffee houses and then small concert venues. And then she got picked up by the industry and quit her job as a teacher and became an entertainer. A recording artist, is quite well known. And that was the very first person that I taught this to. It really works. I use it myself. If I've got a big audience in front of me, I'll just go to the back and do this tapping thing. My anxiety will go down to about a 2, just enough to give me an edge to keep me focused on stage. Works great. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you what it looks like right now. And after that, I'm going to show it to you again, only very slowly, so you can write down or type down what I'm doing so you can remember to learn it. And after that, we're going to practice it 3 or 4 times so you can get the muscle memory going. Then I'll talk a little bit more about it and answer a few questions that you might have. So, and if any of you out there are trained acupuncturists, you'll probably be able to discern which is an acupuncture point and which is just a nerve ending point. And while I do this walkthrough, I'm going to be verbalizing what my self-talk normally is when I do this exercise, just so you can kind of hear how I focus. So I'm going along. I have a cat phobia. I see a cat, my anxiety goes from a 2 to a 10, just like that. So, wow, I feel my heart racing. I'm getting shortness of breath. I remember the technique. So mentally, I'm going like this, first of all. I fully and freely accept myself, even though I have this issue. Fully and freely accept myself, even though I have this issue. Now I'm focusing on my shortness of breath and my racing heart. And just like that, my anxiety has gone from a 10 down to, say a 5. That's good, but that's not good enough. The cat is now coming towards me. So I go like this again. Tap, 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 and like that. Anxiety is down to a 1 or a 2. I feel confident and calm around that cat now. So I'm going to go through this slowly and explain it, and you can catch the recording later, and I invite you also to write things down right now so you can get a sense of being able to remember this. So the first one is this meaty part right here, the karate chop area. And this is a general space. It's not a specific point. And this primes your system. It does something to your nervous system to let you know that things are about to change. And why that phrase works so well, I don't know. I just know that it does. So silently you repeat, even though I have this problem, I fully and freely accept myself. Okay? And then the next point is on the edge of the eye socket, and it's directly below your pupil if you're looking straight ahead. So this is a good one to practice in the mirror so you know exactly where that very specific point is. So look in the mirror a few times after this recording and check that out. It's kind of sensitive, a little bit tender. That's the next one. And then the third one is what I call the bra strap line. I've got a baggy sweater on, sorry about that, but it's directly underneath your armpit. It's a general area, and it's directly across from your nipple, if you're a man or a woman. It's right underneath there. It's kind of that tickle spot. Maybe you tickle kids or you got tickled there when you were a kid. It's kind of sensitive. Tap, tap, tap. Okay? Then the next one is at the end of your eyebrow. If your eyebrow would start to grow in towards the bridge of your nose, it would be the very first place it would start to grow in. So it's on the bony plate, not the edge, but it's right there, and you tap there. Then the final point is, let's see if you can see, this is your clavicle and this is your sternum, kind of like this, your collarbone and your breastbone. And there's a little hollow. If you hunch your shoulders forward, roll them forward, you can really feel that hollow that's in the corner inside where your clavicle and your sternum meet. And you just kind of massage that for a minute. You'll feel a little tender spot right in the center of it. That's what you're going for. And that's the sequence. Now, the trick is to memorize this first. So when you have your anxiety or your panic or your stress or your insomnia, you don't have to struggle with trying to remember the sequence. Because the important thing is to lean into the physical symptoms that you're having. If it's butterflies in your stomach or watery knees or throbbing instant tension headache, that's what you want to do. So that's the sequence. Now I invite you all to practice this and follow along with me. Bra strap example, it's directly underneath your armpit and back from your, if you had kind of drew a line from your nipple going back and drew a line down from your armpit, that's where it is. Yeah, and I will get a picture posted on the website later on for you. But it's good to feel them first and then look at them in a picture later on. So, okay, the last, I guess, skirt back. It's right here where the collarbone and the sternum meet. There's a little hollow right in there. Let's see. There we go. Right in here. I'm kind of bony, so it's easy to see on me. Right in there. Right underneath there. So, like I said, it's kind of a funny thing to do, but it works, and it's well worth knowing. Okay. So that's the last little massage point right there. So let's run through the sequence together. At first, I'm going to do this slowly, and the second time a little faster, and the third time will be about the speed you actually need to do it. The idea isn't to keep tapping like crazy on just one spot. Consider this sequence more like putting your pin in at the ATM machine. You don't dwell on each little keypad. You want the whole sequence at once, and then you get the reward of your cash. So here we go. First, the karate chop. And you say to yourself, I fully and freely accept myself, even though I have this issue. Next is underneath your pupil on the edge of your eye socket. And you're feeling the symptoms while you do that. Next, it's that tickle spot underneath your armpit. And do that right now with me. And then at the end of your eyebrow, dot, 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 dot. Then the final one is right in here, right where the collarbone and the sternum meet. There's that little hollow spot, and that you massage. You'll find a little tender, more sensitive spot right in there. There, you just kind of rub your finger around in the middle of it like that. You can feel it. Okay, so let's do that again. And then I'll ask some questions. You can ask me questions about it. First, I fully and freely accept myself, even though I have this issue. Then, underneath on the eye socket. Then the tickle spot underneath your armpit. Then the eyebrow spot. And you end with massaging right in here, right in that little hollow. There you go. That's it. Now I'm going to show you again the most you need are maybe 4 taps, 6 taps at the most. So this whole thing, you do it very quickly. You may need to repeat it 2 or 3 times before you get your anxiety to the easiest spot. Here we go again. This is the real time how you would do it when you're feeling anxiety. It's that fast. So that's it. One of the first questions people usually ask is, does it matter if it's on the right side or the left side? And the answer to that is no, it does not matter. You can tap all the points on one side of your body, or you can go back and forth from right to left, or you can, it doesn't really matter. So, okay. And yeah, there's a lot of different algorithms, they call them, for these tapping things. This is the one for anxiety and stress and calming down. sometimes if you're feeling stressed and you don't want to look too weird in public, if people are around, you can just do this while you lean into the problem. And this is true with guided imagery, EMDR therapy, other stress management, mindfulness techniques for stress, is you accept the problem, you feel into it, you amplify it, you're paying attention to it. It's a combination of paying attention to it fully while you administer this is what makes it work. So, all right. And any other questions? I'm really happy to take a few questions about this. Okay. Okay. Huh. No questions so far. I say have an open mind. Try it when you're feeling anxious. Practice it before you get anxious so you know that it will work. If a loved one is having suffering from anxiety, insomnia, stress spikes, phobias, panic attacks, yeah, it only works when you have the symptoms in your body at that time. You know, right now, if you're feeling fairly calm and relaxed, nothing is going to happen to you. But it's like a emergency medicine. It's, you know, faster acting than Xanax with no side effects. Yeah. So, okay. And, you know, practice it so you have the muscle memory of how to do this, you know, so, you know, practice it a couple times a day so it's really installed like a habit. And then you only use it when you're feeling stressed out, you know. So, yeah. So again, this would be step number 1, the karate chop. Step number 2 is on the edge of your eye socket directly underneath your pupil. That's step 2. Step 3 is underneath your armpit and back from your nipple. Step 4 is at the end of your eyebrow. And the final step is that little hollow that is between your clavicle and your sternum. If you roll your shoulders forward, you can feel it better the first time. And you just kind of massage in there. It's a bit tender. Yeah. Question. EFT, there's a small percentage of people that for whatever reason, it just doesn't work. And I find that with coaching, most people can understand it. Some, it just takes a little bit more jiggling the nervous system, working with them. And I have an offer to each and every one of you and any CCFM patient. If you want some one-on-one coaching with this, I will give you private one-on-one coaching with this. Just contact me through the internet. You can find me and my website there and my email address. And I'd happily do that. I'm sheltering in place. I have time. I want this information to get out to as many people as possible, especially now. So please feel very much welcome to reach out and I can actually go over that. Yeah, and the exact words again, they've been around for 40 years. Just for the beginning, as you focus into, even though I have this problem, I fully and freely accept myself. Just repeat that a few times. It's priming something. I'm sure you doctors could explain some theories about why this works. I just know that it does work. It's an amazing first aid technique for anxiety and insomnia. And I said insomnia because quite often insomnia is driven by anxiety. This can help you calm down and get to sleep along with your cup of sleepy time tea.
Yeah, Valerie, there's something really interesting, I think, that happens with this exercise that's similar to what you taught us last week also, when you had us invoke the image or the presence of someone or something that we love and activate our parasympathetic, but then at the same time shake a hand or both hands and activate the sympathetic. So you're doing two things at once. And when the brain has that happen, with that karate chop phrase, it's a negative. It's like thinking about the problem, but it's also juxtaposing it against a positive. And that, somehow gets into the brain, to the subconscious, and hits a little reset button, which is pretty helpful.
Yeah, it's pretty extraordinary. Yeah. And it focuses the mindful brain too. You know, the part of your brain that notices what you are noticing, that notices
Yeah.
that you're noticing, and strengthening that, our ability to pay attention to what's going on in the moment is the essence of mindfulness. And so you have to apply that because you really do have to feel the symptoms, you know, your shortness of breath, your galloping heart rate, all of that. You need to feel that while you do this tapping. Most people report it's as though a wind came and just blew it away, or I felt like all of a sudden a pressure valve opened in my body and all the pressure went out. Or somebody said, you know, it's like drinking too much beer and then going behind the bushes. I just feel better. I just feel unloaded. So it has this very quirky way of just going so quickly. And it's very physical. You'll feel it. So I would love feedback from you through me or through the center here to see, you know, if you have a chance to use it this week, what happened, you know? I'd love to hear your stories. And speaking of stories, we're going to go into breakout rooms now. And this is just to talk and check in and see how the homework is doing, if you've been able to apply any of the homework, if there's anything that you want to do with anything more you'd like to learn. And again, what's coming to you this week? What didn't you know about yourself, about life? What's the silver lining in this? What's your emerging edge of growth through this very difficult, hard time we're going through? So
just briefly from a data
Mhm.
point of view again, let's just check in on that. And Christy actually set us up with a little survey form. So I'm gonna put that into the chat box in just a sec. And then you can just click on the link and enter your data really quickly. And before we're done with today's webinar,
Great.
we can kind of give you some feedback. Again, you know, Valerie thought maybe not in terms of would it change, but let's find out.
Yeah.
So again, just please take a minute and write on your piece of paper after. And just take a minute and think about, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being very stressed, how stressed are you? Scale of 1 to 10. Great. And then let's find our pulse point. Again, thumb side of your wrist is where it's easy for me. 2 or even 3 fingers there, and or your neck. And when you have that, I'm going to go ahead and start the timer. We'll do 30 seconds, and we're going to start 3, 2, 1, now. And stop. So write down that number and multiply it by 2. Just as a cross check, on average, our heart rates are usually between 60 to 80, 60 to 90, so that should be somewhere in that ballpark. And then go ahead and look at the chat box on the Zoom. Click on that link, please. And just enter in that data. You scattered your perceived stress beforehand, heart rate beforehand, perceived stress after, heart rate after, and go ahead and submit. I'll give you about a minute to do that. And again, please do not enter the data into the chat box of Zoom. We're going to collect the data by using the link that was in the chat box. If you're having trouble finding the chat box or that data, that link there, it is also on our web page. So you can go to our web page, click on the COVID-19 link, and down at the bottom is another link to the survey. Please do. You should see a little form that says WooFoo by SurveyMonkey, and that's where we'd like you to enter your data. Okay, so Valerie, we can go ahead with the breakout rooms. And just for clarification, Was there a specific exercise or prompt or anything that we want folks to be thinking about as we go into the breakout rooms?
Yeah, what's emerging for you this week? What's different than the week before? If you've been practicing the homework, what's happened? Good, bad, and different. What's the silver lining? What are you noticing that you didn't notice before as a result of going through this very difficult time? What do you want to take with you when this is over? What do you hope remains for you individually when this is over? And we'll talk for about 10 minutes and then wind down. And next week, we're going to go back into deep relaxation using the breath and some guided imagery to boost your immune system and really switch on every possible mind-body faculty that you have to strengthen your immune system and calm down all the body's healing energies. So that's what we'll be doing next week instead of tapping. But I'd truly love to hear how the tapping goes for you. So let's see, I guess
Great. So Christy, if you want to activate the
Great.
breakout rooms, that'd be great. We're now back together as an entire group. Valerie, thanks for all those thoughts. And thank you everyone for your participation. This has been really powerful. As we all get reoriented back together, just wants to move towards wrapping up for today. And it's obviously a very difficult time, a very dynamic time, and really, my thoughts are with all of you, and I wish you guys good health. I wish all of your family members good health, and mental clarity and sanity as we work our way to get through this epidemic. And I think some of the work that Valerie's doing with us is really powerful. Just trying to find different techniques, different ways that you can continually work to ratchet down that stress and that anxiety and that sympathetic nervous system activation. And the exercises that we're teaching you can be deceptively powerful. And so really, use them, practice them this week. And like Valerie mentioned, we're going to have a chance next week to present the content, go through some updates as well, but also do some additional exercises, stress reduction, mind body in a deeper way. So Valerie, do you have anything you'd like to add as we're wrapping up? Your mic's muted.
There we go. Practice, practice. See for yourself what works. Some of the things that you'll be using, you'll take to and they'll be wonderful. Some not so much, but we're going to keep adding more tools to your toolkit every single week. And I know you'll find 3 or 4 that will really make a difference in keeping you calm, cool, collected, grounded, and filling your life with more peace and less stress. So on we go. Thank you for the opportunity to share what I know about that with this amazing group of people. So that's it. Until next week.
Wonderful. Give me 1 sec as we wrap up. Just calculating some averages on the data. Briefly, yeah, so we're going to do a little more data crunching, but I just want to report back to you guys that just on the heart rate, we have a little bit of cleaning up to do on the perceived stress, but on the heart rate before, the group average was 78.4, and the heart rate average, the group average was 73.38. So 78.44 down to 73.38. So a drop of almost 5. So
wow.
Pretty cool.
I'm impressed. I didn't think just in an awkward learning situation that would make that much difference. It's great.
Yeah,
Next week, I would expect to see more because we're doing a deep dive, but that's great news.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Valerie. Thanks, Lindsay. Thank you, Ramsey.
Yeah.
Thanks, Christy, all of our whole team. And thanks to all of you patients out there. And we look forward to seeing you back next week. Stay safe out there.
Great. Thank you.